solutions. The only person I remember standing in front of the Supreme Court calling for a whirlwind on Justice Kavanaugh and other Supreme Court justices that were followed up by assassination attempts of Supreme Court justices, that were followed up by violent protests outside their homes where they had to move out of their homes, was Chuck Schumer.
Do you fail to believe the NSA and the DOD when they say that the use of commercial apps like Signal is a security threat and inappropriate for confidential or sensitive data?
I haven't heard what either of those entities has said.
So you don't have any idea what the view of the intelligence community is about the use of commercial apps to conduct government business involving classified or sensitive national security information? You have no idea what the position is?
Sometimes referred to as a nationwide injunction.
Yes, it is, Senator.
Okay. What's the statutory basis for a federal judge issuing an order that affects people other than the parties before the court?
I'm not aware of a statutory basis, Senator.
There is no statutory basis, is there?
No, Senator.
What's the United States Supreme Court opinion which interprets the Constitution in a way that allows a federal district court judge to do this? Can you name me that case?
I'm not aware of one, Senator.
There isn't one, is there?
I'm not aware of one, Senator.
Now, explain to me how this works. You have a plaintiff and you have a defendant. And the plaintiff files a lawsuit and goes in front of a federal judge. Federal judge has certain jurisdiction in personam and subject matter over the parties, the people, the plaintiff and the defendant. They're the only two people in court. How can a judge, a federal judge, issue an order that affects everybody else other than those in front of him or her? How is that possible?
It shouldn't be possible, Senator, but district courts do it all the time. I think on the theory that the courts need to enjoin a federal policy from going into effect, and they often will enjoin it as nationwide, so all non-parties are protected by that injunction.
I thought that if you wanted to affect parties who aren't in court, you had to file a class action.
That's correct, Senator.
So why don't the federal judges, instead of issuing a universal injunction with no legal basis, tell the plaintiff, look, you got to go file a class action if you want to impact parties who aren't subject to my court?
Senator, the Department of Justice makes that argument all the time in our briefs. I think in many cases class actions would be inappropriate. They wouldn't. The plaintiffs couldn't satisfy Rule 23 to establish a class.
So they couldn't?
Correct.
So they preferred to ask for a universal injunction?
Yes.
Okay. Does this encourage forum shopping?
Yes, Senator. Not only does it encourage forum shopping, but also district shopping and filing multiple strategic lawsuits to find one judge that will enjoin a single policy nationwide. Where if you have 5 lawsuits, a plaintiff, only one of those 5 cases needs to be successful.
And both sides, all sides, have used this as a way to forum shop, haven't they?
I think plaintiffs, regardless of administrations, will often file cases in the most favorable forum, yes.
Okay, we've established that there's no basis in statute and no basis in Supreme Court precedent for a universal injunction. How about at common law? I mean, universal injunction is basically an equitable remedy. Did this exist in common law courts in England on which our law is based?
I don't believe so, Senator. I think the government has cited cases from the Supreme Court that says, courts are really bound by the scope of relief that a court in equity would have granted back in England before the founding, and the courts at that time would grant relief to the parties in the case, not far beyond the.
A universal injunction as a remedy is unknown in English common law, is it not?
I haven't done the research that far back, but I'm not aware of
I have.
Okay.
It's unknown. Wasn't part of equity. Only about 27 universal injunctions were issued in the 20th century. Does that sound about right?
That sounds about right, Senator.
But 86 of them were issued against President Trump in his first term. Is that correct?
I don't know the specific number, but they were a high number.
And so far in President Trump's second term, 30 universal injunctions have been issued against him, have they not?
Senator, I don't have a specific number, but that sounds about right.
The universal injunction has become a weapon against the Trump administration, has it not?
Yes.
And tell me again in my last 10 seconds, tell me the basis for universal injunction in Article 3. I read Article 3, which defines judicial power. Where does it mention universal injunction?
It does not, Senator. It says courts are to decide the case or controversy before them, which is based on the parties to the case.
So the Congress could act and say, look, federal judges, you render a decision to a plaintiff or a defendant, but you can't impact people outside of your courtroom other than through a class action. That's why God created class actions, isn't it?
Yes, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Eisenberg, you served during the first administration as the NSC legal advisor. In that capacity, you must have participated in dozens, if not hundreds, of principal meetings organized by the National Security Advisor. Did you conduct any of those meetings by text chat that involved military strike plans?
No, I don't believe so.
So the entire first 4 years of the Trump administration, you never had a text chat conversation about plans to strike targets using an unencrypted or using a commercial app?
Well, I'm not aware of any such incident anyhow.
And you didn't do that because that would have been a terrible national security breach of protocol, would not?
I would have to know a lot more to know whether that would be a breach.
Would you really need to know more than a conversation about military targets, the time of the attack, the location of the targets, the ordnance being used?
Sure, you'd want to know whether the device is up to a certain level so that it could. I mean, you might make one that
Okay, we're talking about a commercial app like Signal. Would it ever be appropriate to discuss imminent plans to strike military targets on a commercial app?
I still think it's very difficult to answer that question in the abstract. I mean, I can think of circumstances in which you could, sure.
Oh, well, give us a circumstance in which you can talk about an imminent military attack unknown to the public, where it would be appropriate to do so on a commercial app.
Okay, something absolutely urgent happens and needs to go right now, and your normal communication systems don't work. I mean, there's an example where you may have to do something like that.
And where you have access to classified facilities, it would be completely inappropriate, wouldn't it?
I still need to know more.
Really? Wow. And you want to lead the National Security Department at the DOJ, and you would need to know more?
Yes, Senator, I'd like to lead the NSD, and I think I'm exceptionally qualified to do so.
And do you fail to believe the NSA and the DOD when they say that the use of commercial apps like Signal is a security threat and inappropriate for confidential or sensitive data?
I haven't heard what either of those entities has said.
So you don't have any idea what the view of the intelligence community is about the use of commercial apps to conduct government business involving classified or sensitive national security information? You have no idea what the position is?
No, I'm sure the position is that in general that should never happen.
Okay, so what happened in this Signal chat should never have happened. Do you agree with that?
No, as I said before, I would need to know more.
Have you read the Signal chat?
I have not yet.
Yeah, you have not read it. Are you desiring to be willfully blind to what just happened?
No, I was trying to prepare for this hearing, among other things.
Oh, and you didn't anticipate you'd be asked about this? Or is it because you anticipated you would be asked about this, you didn't want to inform yourself of this incredible breach of national security?
There are millions of things going on in the world at any given time. So I just didn't happen to learn about this one.
Oh, I see. There are millions of things going on. Yes, I'm sure there are millions of things going on in the world. But this happens to be probably the biggest national security story of the month, which included a lot of other national security stories, including a war in the Middle East and including capitulation to Putin and Russia. But you just happened to neglect to read this one. Is that what we're led to believe?
I just happened not to read it, that's all.
Well, let me ask you this. If you're using a commercial app to discuss the identity of targets, their locations, and that information were to become public, it could compromise those operations, couldn't it?
It depends on what the operation is and where in the operation.
Well, let's say an operation to strike targets in Yemen, Houthi targets that identify, say, a top missile operative and the location of the girlfriend's building. Those kind of specific details discussed on a commercial app could jeopardize that operation if it became public.
Yeah.
Isn't that true?
It depends on the circumstances. And
Well, I
that's
just gave you the
And that's why I'm not going to
circumstances.
answer a hypothetical question.
Well, it's not hypothetical. I wish to hell it were hypothetical. This just happened. This was shared with a journalist on a commercial app. You need more information than that? Well, how about discussing denigrating our European allies on a commercial app? Could that have diplomatic fallout?
I don't know the circumstances.
Really? So the vice president's conversations on this app, others joining in and disparaging Europe, this is completely new information to you. You're unaware. You can't comment on whether that could interfere with our relationship with our closest allies?
No, I heard of the incident. I just, at this point, hadn't had time to look at it closely.
Yeah.
I'm a lawyer, sir, and before I make decisions and form opinions, I need to look at the facts carefully.
Yeah, and you don't hide from the facts as a lawyer. And if you
Absolutely
want to
not.
head the
Of course
National
not.
Security Division at the Department of Justice, you don't stick your head in the sand when we've had a serious breach of our national security so that you don't have to answer uncomfortable questions.
That's
Mr.
not
Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do find it interesting that my Democrat colleagues are so enraged by this non-story and had nothing to say when we had a president who literally couldn't put two sentences together for 2 years. President Autopin was the commander-in-chief. No questions about his inability to construct sentences, let alone foreign policy. But here we are with a fake story. But this is what happens when you have a party that has reached actually not rock bottom yet. Not rock bottom yet. But they got nothing. Zero. No issues, no leader, fringe issues define them. So they're going to glom onto the story of the day. And quite frankly, it's embarrassing for them. Just like, by the way, these calls to, come out against violence. The only thing, district court rulings, the only thing that's been talked about are political solutions. The only person I remember standing in front of the Supreme Court calling for a whirlwind on Justice Kavanaugh and other Supreme Court justices that were followed up by assassination attempts of Supreme Court justices, that were followed up by violent protests outside their homes where they had to move out of their homes, was Chuck Schumer. And as long as we're denouncing violence, how about firebombing Tesla dealerships? This Antarctic kind of strain runs through the left. And to my Democrat friends, I feel bad for you because your party has been captured by a radical element that is pro-Hamas, that is pro-violence, that is firebombing, Tesla dealerships because they don't like that Elon Musk has actually found the grift out and is cutting it out. The NGOs that have laundered money for Democrat causes for years, it's all coming to an end and they don't know how to handle it. So anyway, as far as sort of some of these rulings, I would point out that in the most recent case with the Venezuelan thugs who've now been imprisoned in El Salvador, the apex of presidential power is, as Justice Jackson wrote in the Youngstown Steel case in his concurrence, is that the apex when you have congressional delegation or core Article II powers. as commander-in-chief. And the district court, in citing the Alien Enemies Act, where whether wartime or invasion or predatory incursion, the president is acting within his authority. The district court has no more authority to tell the president he can't do that than they can, speaking of national security, directing troop movements or missile strikes. So when we talk about separation of powers, it does go both ways. It does go both ways, and there's been this obsession with getting all of you on the record about following court orders. The President of the United States has said he will follow court orders time and time again, but it's this desire to just stir up something because they have nothing. That's what's going on here. I did want to ask, with the time that I have left, Mr. Davis, you have done a lot of great work investigating a lot of things. The origins of COVID. I'm just curious. So when I was Attorney General of Missouri, we actually sued Communist China for unleashing the COVID pandemic. We received a $24 billion default judgment recently. But when we filed that lawsuit, it was interesting, the reaction. You were called a racist if you implied anyway that it leaked out of Wuhan, which was very obvious to most people. And now the intelligence community, who for some reason resisted that conclusion for such a long time, has basically said that's what happened. What do you think, as you were investigating this, what was behind that? What was behind this resistance to all the evidence and the obvious nature of the origins of COVID?
Thank you, Senator, for that question. I appreciated speaking with you yesterday. That was great. The report that I authored on the House Intelligence Committee about the origins of COVID, unfortunately, is still classified, so I can't really get into the specifics of what it found. We did do an unclassified summary, which, just given the nature of the underlying information, was unfortunately not terribly revelatory. I would note that when then President Biden instructed the intelligence community to do a sort of comprehensive review on the COVID origins, the subsequent report they put out and the declassified version of it, there were serious flaws with. And I think those flaws, you mentioned that individual components have changed their public view, but I do think that until there's more transparency about what was going on within those elements of the intelligence community, the people won't really know the full story, unfortunately.
Thank you. Well, it is also interesting that that Fauci played a very significant role in this, and maybe we'll be hearing from him in some committee hearings sometime soon too. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.